The following podcast is brought to you exclusively by the Rad Rob Radio Network.
Welcome to the Leadership Evolution Podcast, where we explore what happens after the build. I'm Luke Mickelson, founder, leader, and someone who's walked through the challenges of growing an organization, letting go, and learning how to lead in a completely new way. This podcast is for founders, executives, and leaders who are navigating growth, identity, and the tension between control and legacy. Because building something great is only the beginning. Learning how to evolve with it, that's the real work. Let's dive in. Well, hello, everybody. Luke's back here with the Leadership Evolution Podcast for another amazing episode. Guys, I can't tell you how excited I am about our new guest. And new, I mean, they're all basically new. But this guy, I tell you what, he's got some experience. He's recognized as a professional in his league. My guest starts out, let me read his bio for you guys. He's an executive coach, author, and leadership strategist dedicated to helping founders and business owners build organizations that grow without losing what made them successful in the first place. After spending more than 25 years in the financial services industry and rising from the mailroom to the executive leadership, awesome story, Joe now helps leadership teams create scalable businesses that prioritize culture, alignment, and sustainable success. As the creator of the STAR Scalability Method and author of the Follow the Star, Unlock Monumental Business Growth, Joe specializes in helping leaders close the gap between how they believe they're leading and how their employees actually experience leadership. His practical approach equips organizations to strengthen communication, develop high-performing teams, and build businesses that support the lives of their leaders instead of consuming them. Joe's passion is helping leaders scale with intention, creating organizations that are not only more profitable, but healthier, more resilient, and built to last. My guest today, I'm proud to introduce Joe Patneaude. Did I get your last name right? Patneaude, right?
Absolutely did.
I won't lie to you. I may have Googled how to say that, by the way, brother.
If it works, it's not crazy.
Yeah. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks, Luke.
Well, listen, I was excited about your bringing you on, because part of what the Leadership Evolution Podcast focuses in on, obviously, the evolution of not just the leader himself, but the business as well. And you can't evolve without scaling a business. And this is right down your alley. So you began your career in the mailroom. I have to say, number one, the first thing I thought of, Chris, I don't know if you ever seen the movie Secret to My Success.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why that's the first thing I thought of. You're Michael J. Fox here, my brother. Tell me, what happened? Like, start from the beginning. You're in the mailroom.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm a little taller than Michael J. Fox, so we'll go with that. But no, I actually, it even starts before that, Luke. I grew up in a very, small town, blue collar environment. First business I ever built was a landscaping business, and then I spent a couple of years in a factory, doing manufacturing stuff. And then I decided I wanted to change the scenery, move to another state, and just happened to be the first job that I got was in the mailroom of a mutual fund company. Literally delivering inter-office mail, making sure there's enough pencils and paper clips and stuff like that, in each office area. And I was fascinated by what the company did. I started just asking lots of questions, and saying, well, what do you do? Like, how does this all work together? Why is this department here? What does that department do? Just asking questions because I like to say inquisitive. Some people call it nosy. But it works, right?
Sure, yeah.
And, the short version of the story is, a couple of years in that role and saying, well, why can't we do this a better way? There's lots of things, like even inventory control of, as simple as it sounds, controlling how much inventory we have on hand of pens and paper and things like that, just redoing all that and saying, well, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. I was fortunate enough to have a couple of really good leaders in the company that said, hey, wait a minute, this guy might actually be worth more than just delivering inter-office envelopes. And I started, getting promoted. I laugh and say it wasn't the first job that was the kicker of the story. It's really the first promotion, because my first promotion was to being a backup receptionist.
Okay,
so
I've never
that's
heard
how
that
low
before.
on the totem pole I was, man. But I spent 5.5 years with that first company, and in that time, I went from the mailroom all the way up through customer service, multiple levels of customer service. Actually ended up becoming the quality control person and the trainer for the transfer agent of that mutual fund, all within 5.5 years. And then, from there, I again moved, found another company.
How old were you at the time, by the way? How old were you?
Well, I'm only 25 now. No, all joking aside, I was about 21 when I started in that job. Okay. And so I moved to Florida at about 26. And, at that point, again, starting to work with other broker dealers and financial advisory firms and things like that. Same mentality, though. Take the job, learn it, and ask lots of questions about everybody around you and learn what they're doing. And then say, okay, well, what licensing can I get? What certifications can I get? And doing that just to keep going. And by the time I hit my 10 years in my career, that 10th year, I got my first senior level management role. Now, I had worked up through regular, mid-level management and team leadership roles. But at that point, I got my first senior level role, and I was a director of IT for a broker dealer in Tampa. And then, that translated into, other operational management roles, and eventually COO, CCO. And of course, along the way, because I've always got to have my hands in more than one thing at a time, I've built and sold a couple of businesses along the way, all in financial services. I built my own financial services practice while being a senior manager and a district manager for a large organization here in Tampa. And built a P&C agency at the same time. So it was a fun story.
Growing up, you must have grown up, had obviously an entrepreneurial mind. Like when you were little, did you enjoy or have aspirations of owning your own company?
So, it's funny because I get that question a lot. And as a kid, I can't, with any degree of honesty, say, yes, I dreamed of being, the owner of my own firm. But I knew I didn't want to work for somebody else and follow somebody else's rules all the time. I wanted to be the one setting the pace. And I think, if you ask certain people in my lives, they may call me a control freak. Maybe that's true. But the reality is I just really enjoy helping other people be more than they are. And that's the only reason my career ever got to what it was because I had a few people that saw that in me, and they felt the same way. They wanted to help me be more than I was, and they gave me the opportunity. And now I just love doing that for other people.
Wow. Well, from the mailroom to executive leadership, there's lessons that you obviously learned along that journey. Do you still follow those same lessons as you lead today?
Yes, absolutely. I still today approach everything with a questioning mindset first. It has to be the inquisitiveness. I think when you lose that, you start becoming very narrow-minded and blind to the opportunities that are out there and to your own shortcomings, because none of us are perfect. And, I think the one thing that really stood out to me when I look back on the 25 years in that particular industry before I started stepping more to the side and leadership coaching and things, is really just the fact that because I've been at every level of the organization, it's amazing to me how different people at different levels of an organization view everything that happens in a different way. It's a completely different experience. What one level might be experienced as a very positive thing and a very positive change can be just devastating to the emotional and mental well-being of another person at another level. And I think that perception gap is what you hear me talk about a lot. because of that. It's so shocking to me how there can be so many different views of the same thing in one organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is there, as you've grown in those different ranks, I mean, was there parts that you liked more than others? I mean, certainly there's got to be, right?
Oh, of course, and depending on which role we're looking at, there's always the good and the bad with everything, right? I think the one thing that I would say that I always liked the most, and it didn't matter if I was a team leader, a mid-level manager, a trainer, or all the way up to a C-suite role. Mm-hmm. The one thing I always really enjoyed the most was helping people look outside of their current responsibilities to see that they were capable of more and that they didn't have to be stuck with the idea of, I'm going to do this every day for the next 30 years until I die. Mm-hmm. Helping people grow into other things. And grow doesn't necessarily mean going up the hierarchy. I should probably clarify that. Not everybody wants to be a C-suite leader. Not everybody wants the responsibility of management, and I understand that. But helping people grow and just try new things, do new things, and realize that they can become more than they are professionally. Mm-hmm. It really gives them a reason to come back to work besides the paycheck, because the person that shows up just for the paycheck is not going to be your top performer.
Right. No. Yeah. In fact, I was just interviewing a guy just the other day, and he liked to promote within, right? And he said, it's really interesting that most people that either fail to move up in the ranks within their own organization, typically it's because they can't see it. They don't think, or not necessarily want, they don't even know that they should want that or even want that. As you grew, I mean, you entered the mailroom. Did you always have aspirations of moving up?
I always knew I wanted to try the next thing, not necessarily move up. You have to understand, at that point, I also had a self-confidence issue that told me, you're never going to be, the guy in charge. You're never going to be the C-suite. So when that happened, it was just as shocking to me as it was to everybody else. But I knew I didn't want to do the same thing every day. One thing that I had learned, and this is going back even before my financial services career, working in a factory for 2 years in manufacturing. Okay, it was a good job. The pay was good. No complaints there, but it was repetitive. And that was the one thing I didn't enjoy. I felt like mentally I was dying. And then I realized, even in the white collar world, when I got into financial services, that still happens. If you are doing the same thing all the time, day in and day out, it's not intellectually stimulating at a certain point. And what I knew wasn't so much that I wanted to grow and be a chief operating officer, a chief compliance officer, a chief executive officer. It was, I don't want to be bored. I don't want to do anything the same way for 20, 30, 40 years. I want to do new things. I want to learn as much as possible and try new things so that I'm not punching the same time clock for 40 years.
It's funny you say that. I feel very similar to that. And oftentimes, Joe, I look at that almost like a bad thing. Like maybe I wish I wasn't that way. Do you feel the same way sometimes? I mean,
it's easy to feel that way, especially when we look at social media, or not just social media, but just media in general, right? There's, especially here in the States, we've got a big push for this hustle mentality and hustle culture. You got to work 80 hours a week, and you got to brag about not sleeping, and you got to brag about working 7 days a week to look like you're doing better than everybody else. And in reality, if that's what motivates you, great, more power to you. But because that is so prevalent in everything we see, even on LinkedIn and Facebook and everything else, it makes you feel guilty when you don't want the same things, because it makes you wonder, is there something wrong with me? And what I've learned is, it doesn't mean there's anything right or wrong with either approach. It's just that everybody's an individual, and what's going to motivate you is going to be a little bit different. And so I tend to look at it as more of a positive. I like the people who are going to learn, and because I am a person who wants to learn. And so the people who want the hustle mentality are going to be attracted to people who have the hustle mentality, and so on and so forth. So no, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with it, but yes, I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Well, isn't it? It's like, you're right. You look around, right? And there's a culture in our culture of business, of growing, and yeah, you got the hustle and bustle. I mean, heck, that's what it's called, the hustle and bustle, right? And if you don't feel like you're part of that, you don't feel like when you get to know a skill, right, and you do it day in and day out, it does feel like, at least to me, it does feel a little mundane after a while. So I'm always looking for either ways to either improve it, until you get to the point where, okay, it's about as much as it can get, right? Then it's okay. I got to look at doing something different, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's, yeah, you're right. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's in a lot of ways it's a great thing. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they're builders, right? They see a problem, they want to fix it, right? And pro or con, good or bad, you start fixing a problem. Sure enough, ultimately you're going to find another problem you want to fix, and another problem you want to fix, and and then that's why.
To be perfectly honest, that's what so many of our industries are based on, right? Not just being an entrepreneur in any industry. I agree with you. You have to have this belief that not only you can do it better, but that you want to do it better, and that you found a way to do it better.
Yeah.
But even in the services that we sell, you take my financial services career, so many people look at it and say, well, everybody offers the same thing. We all have the same stocks on the stock market. But it comes down to that belief of, I think I can do it better than the guy next door, and here's why. Mm-hmm. And that is that founder mentality. That's that entrepreneurial mindset that goes back to being, the builder. And I agree with you on that.
Yeah. So you've been in the financial industry, working C-level, climbed to the C-level corporation, and now coaching. So yeah, take us down that road. What made you decide to do that? And then take us from there.
So, again, nothing's a straight answer, right? There's always more than one aspect. So I'll just preface that.
Good. I'd rather be it that way.
So, back up a few years, right? So a few years ago, I actually took a sabbatical sort of from my career as far as full-time work goes. My mother had been diagnosed with cancer, and I knew that she was going to need a lot of my time, and that meant I had to choose between my career, even though I was a C-suite executive, or being there for that whole process of going through the cancer and knowing how it was going to end. Okay. So going through all that, I had some decisions to make, and I decided to leave my career because I was confident I could rebuild it. And what I actually did was, that was when I built my last financial practice, because I have built two. I built my last financial practice and my insurance agency at the same time, while caring for her, because thankfully, to the digital world we live in, I was able to do virtual work, and it gave me the flexibility I needed. I didn't need to worry about commuting and being available when I didn't want to be. I could set all those parameters, right? Mm-hmm. So I spend the time with her, and 3 years later, I'm ready to go back to full-time work. The situation has changed. She's no longer with us, and now I can go back to focusing on me. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I went back, I got another C-suite role, right? And I worked for an investment advisor as their chief compliance officer. I sold both of my businesses and said, I'm going to just do this one thing again for a while. And I went in and it was great, right? Like it was a struggling firm that we were able to triple the size of in just under 3 years. Wow. So that was phenomenal, right? I'd love to say it was single-handedly, but obviously I had a really good team around me to help with that.
Sure.
But it was a really great experience. But at the end of that 3 years, I talked to the CEO and I said, this is kind of becoming day-to-day to me. And I think based on what we said earlier, we know that didn't work well with me. Right. So we structured an exit so that, the firm wasn't left in the lurch. They were able to get the structure in place to replace me and to make sure that the firm could keep going with its goals, right, which was really good. And I decided to step away from it. And when I did, I spent about a month going, why am I even looking for a job? Because any job I've looked at and any role I've ever had, my impact was, of course, confined to either the department or the company that I was working for. And what energizes me yes, it's helping people that I'm directly working with, but more so just helping people in general. Okay, that's why I love being an advisor. That's why I love being in all these leadership roles. So how do I make that impact exponential? And that was really the question I had to ask myself. And when I found the answer to that, I realized I had found what I really wanted to do. So that's where I sat down and I put everything together and released the book, and created a methodology that really simplifies a lot of this stuff down that leaders face every day into just a few core components. And I said, how do I magnify my impact? Well, if I'm helping leaders be better leaders, that's helping their staff be better staff. And my impact now isn't on just one company. My impact is on dozens of companies at any given moment, depending on who I'm working with. And to be able to sit back and see those results, both the tangible results, that you can see on a spreadsheet on the bottom line, but the more intangible results of staff being happier working for these folks and turnover rates dropping and things like that, that's extremely rewarding. So when I go to make that decision, it was a little bit selfish on my part, because I get so much enjoyment out of seeing that impact that's what I wanted more of. And I'd already been doing the consulting thing on the side over the last 10, 15 years. So it was just a very natural progression to say, instead of doing it on the side for friends and people who know me, let's do this full time and really bring that impact to the rest of the world.
Wow. And it seems like your book's called Follow the Star, and you've developed the STAR Scalability Method. It seems like you do a lot of focus on the scaling a business, scaling the growth. Why focus? And I'm just assuming here, but why focus so much on that?
So one of the problems that I see is that almost every leader I've ever met wants to grow their business. I mean, very few of them say, hey, I want my business to be smaller and worth less, right? They all want their business to grow. But they struggle because of for example, we talked about some of the perception gaps. And so many leaders start their business because, as you said, Luke, they're builders, they have a good vision, they know they have a good way of doing it. But just because you're good at the job doesn't necessarily mean you're a natural born leader. Leadership is a very difficult thing, right? Motivating people, being tough enough to set the direction, but kind enough not to drive everybody away. There's a balance, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so the STAR Scalability Method really just goes down to a few basic core components. And first, it diagnoses what you're good at and what you're not good at. And it really diagnoses what are the strengths in your business. And it goes far beyond the traditional SWOT analysis or anything like that. It really dives in and says, why are you doing this? What was, when you said to yourself, I'm going to start my business, what was the motivation for doing it? Beyond the money, beyond the flexibility, but what was the core reasons? And then what are you doing every day that's magnifying that? And what are you doing every day that's detracting you away from it? Because as a leader, you have to not only recognize what's really good in the people and the resources that you have and using that to your advantage, but so many leaders forget to look back at themselves and say, where is my time best spent? Where do I get the most fulfillment? Because most people, by the time they call me, have run into the same problem and say one of the same few things, which is, I've started to hate my business, or I feel like I need to just walk away from it, whether it's financially or stress or whatever. They feel like they need to walk away from it for some reason. Or my favorite line, this is one I've heard 2 different times this year, actually, from 2 different clients, is, I feel like I'm the administrative assistant to my staff. And CEO should feel that way. So STAR really just comes down to those core values and helps you figure out what's good, what's bad, and then realigning everything. Because once you get the foundation fixed, then you can build the house on top of it.
Why do so many leaders struggle? I mean, almost, you talk about culture, establishing culture, maintaining culture, but also quality of life. It seems like a lot of leaders unintentionally, actually maybe accidentally sacrifice both as they grow. Why is that?
Well, I agree with you. I think it's accidental for one thing. Like, I don't know of anybody that goes out and says, "I want
to ruin my life."
I'm sure that person exists. I just haven't met them yet. I definitely think there's some people that go out and make other people miserable for fun, but that's beside the point. Yeah. But I think really where it comes into is that drift. It's a drift away from your alignment of your values. One person I worked with, I'll give you an example. It was a retail distribution firm, and this woman owned this retail distribution firm, and she came to me and said, "I really need to expand into a second territory." And I said, "Okay, why?" And she said, "Well, I need more money so that I can afford to do this and afford to do that and spend more time with my daughter." She was a single mother, and her daughter was she was early teenage, like 13, 14 years old at this point. Sure. And I said, "Okay, great." I said, "Why'd you start your business?" And she said, "Well, I needed money, and I was a single mom, and I wanted to spend more time with my daughter and all this other stuff." I said, "So you started your business so that you could be more flexible with your schedule and spend time with your daughter, right? That was your primary concern." She said, "Yes." I said, "Okay. And that worked for a while, right?" She said, "Yes, until I started to grow, and now the business is taking too much from me, so I need a second territory." And I went, "Okay, you're talking about expanding the problem that created the problem." And as simple as that sounds, when we're sitting here talking about it, people do it all the time in every industry. So what we did was we focused on, why did you do this? And then how do we get the tools and the resources and the people in place that are going to help you have the time flexibility you need? Fast forward, less than 6 months later, she's in a position to take on a second territory. A year later, both territories are doing well. She's gone from working an average of about 70 to 80 hours a week down to working 30, and some of them are from home. She's finally put in the delegation she needs. She's got the right tools, but we didn't focus on profitability ever. Profitability came with it, but we focused on, how do we get you back to that core value that you started the company for? And I see it happen all the time. And I think a lot of it is part of what we talked about, the hustle culture and the mentality of, if you're not working hard enough, you're a loser, which is unfortunately permeates our society sometimes. Yeah. But we go to conferences, for example. We go to sales conferences and symposiums and trade shows, and we all hear our colleagues and our compatriots throughout the industries that we work in. And we hear the motivational speakers all telling us, you can do 10 times as much if you just hustle a little harder. We can hear the guy next to us saying, "Well, I've been in the industry for a year less than you, and I'm making $100,000 a year more." Well, all of that pushes us and makes us feel like we're falling behind. But in reality, it's because we're not even benchmarking it against what we ever wanted to start with.
Wow. Taking it back to the beginning.
You got to go back to the beginning. And I've never seen
a business that
goes back to the beginning that didn't end up further ahead.
Interesting. Wow, that's beautiful. You help founders, leaders close the gap, right, between how they think they're leading and maybe how their employees are actually experiencing that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. What is the common gap that you see there, and and how do leaders, founders, how can they overcome that gap or mitigate that gap before it becomes a problem?
Yeah. So typically what I see is that you have a leader who's going in with the best of intentions because they think that they're doing something, they're making a decision that's either going to be just, tremendous for the firm overall, or, if we want to talk more specific example, that they're going to put in some new tool that's going to make operations easier, faster, more accurate, those kinds of things, right? It's anything along those lines where they're trying to improve life for the staff and the business typically. But they haven't really stopped to think about the nitty-gritty and how things are done on a day-to-day basis. Think about how whatever this change they're making is going to impact the actual process that's taking place. And a lot of that stems from the fact that most businesses, again, as founders, we have a skill. We know what we're doing. And we go in and we build the business. We make every decision. We know that process. But as that business grows, business also changes And the founder doesn't necessarily keep up with all those nitty-gritty changes as the business grows. My favorite example is in financial services. I worked with a CEO of an investment advisory firm. He hadn't been in production in about 30 years. So since the late 90s, he had just been the CEO and had a team that was doing all the sales. He couldn't understand why his operations staff was so bogged down, because when he did it, the application was a one-page document, front and back, but one page to open a new account. Right now, the application process, because of all the changes since 2001 and things like that, the application process for the average account is anywhere between 40 and 70 pages now.
Oh, yeah.
He was still basing it on, well, you know, it's one page worth of work, and when you type it into the system, it fills in all the stuff automatically. He wasn't being realistic, and it wasn't an intentional thing. He just had the rose-colored glasses on, is what I like to tell people. He was using nostalgia to think that things were easier, faster, and better when he did it, and it sort of drifts, right? And we see that a lot with founders in how they drift from their intentions. And so they start making these changes without thinking about all the little steps. And my other favorite thing there is, if you say to a founder sometimes, well, this is going to be one extra step for this person or one extra click of the mouse, it doesn't sound like that big of a deal to say it's one extra click of a mouse until you're the person that's doing it 100 times an hour. And then all of a sudden, getting the same amount of work produced isn't realistic, because that magnifies. It's not one click of a mouse extra. It's thousands. And that's how many extra seconds a day, how many extra minutes a day. And that's the part that, because they get disconnected from it, they're coming in with this perception, the leaders, saying, I'm doing everything to make life better. My staff should be grateful. The staff is saying, this idiot is putting a new process in place without realizing I'm going to now have to do this, this, and this, and create this extra checklist to remember to do that. And now I've got all these extra steps. Now the staff is saying, my leader's out of touch and doesn't care about me, and I'm not even getting paid extra for this. And that is exactly verbatim the conversation that happens. So you bring everybody together and you find out the intention and the real impacts, and you account for both, then you got everybody on the same page. It's a whole different world.
Yeah. Have you found, as you worked with leaders, you know, and this podcast I put together, you know, mostly for founder, CEO, and large C-type level business leaders that are running teams and building things, because we're builders, right? And we start something, and it's interesting as entrepreneurs, as we build something, especially something we're very passionate about. You see this a lot in the nonprofit space, and that's the space that I'm mostly successful in. I've started and stopped a lot of businesses, but my nonprofit has been very successful, and so I know this space pretty well. And you know, and a lot of these nonprofits and for-profits as well, their companies start from something very passionate, something they feel very close to, maybe a trauma or something like that. Well, as they build this and grow passion for it, their identity becomes fused together, right? You know, they're one and the same. 99.9% of the people on this planet only know me because of the organization I started, you know, and early on, they only knew the organization because I started it, you know, they only knew about it because of me. So you become one and the same. And I think that identity fusion that happens, founders, and let's be real, it needs to happen. It needs to happen, and it's unavoidable, especially when you know you're going to sacrifice so much to build your business. You know, you're going balls to the wall, you know, making it happen, especially early on, and you're wearing all the hats, right? Well, as you scale, as you grow, right, as you evolve in your leadership, in your business is going to evolve differently than you as the founder, as the leader, because you're a human being, and it's not. You know, it doesn't care about you. You care about it far more than it's ever going to care about you. So, and this phenomenon, right? I call it founder syndrome. It's common. It's known as founder syndrome, and I think it's a phenomenon that every founder eventually at some level will experience, or leader will experience, but they don't know how to manage and handle some of the certainly the emotional shifts that happen as you scale and as you deal with entrepreneurs, founders, whatnot, and they shift from becoming the person who does everything to becoming the leader who develops others, right? What's the one thing? Probably I know there's a lot of things. Like what's the most critical thing you teach them to be prepared for as they start bringing people up with them and handing off hats?
The one thing I tell everybody to be most prepared for is to be uncomfortable. It's not easy to let go of some of that control. You said it yourself, Luke. As a founder, especially, you're used to making every decision. You're used to solving every problem, and you're used to everything coming through you. And if you're going to run your business that way, you're going to get bogged down. You're going to start to hate it, and you're going to limit its growth, right? No matter how much you add on to it, you're just inflating the business, not scaling it. There's a big difference, right?
Right.
Because with scaling it, you're trying to exponentially distribute your energy, not just go one for one with growth. So the first thing I tell everybody is be uncomfortable. The first time you set up a decision-making process and put somebody in a position and give them authority to follow that process, it is going to hurt. Your natural urge is going to be to want to hover over them and everything else. So there's a few things we do to combat that. One of them is set the parameters in your own mind, but we sit down and do it together as an exercise is,
sure. What
are the parameters are they going to be considered acceptable? Not ideal, not perfect, not the way, that Luke would have done it himself. but what's acceptable to you? What's unacceptable to you? And you have to know in those decisions what you're going to consider acceptable and unacceptable, and make sure that is established with the people delegating to it. Okay. Same thing with the technology, as silly as that sounds, right? Like, it sounds easy to delegate a decision to somebody, but you still have to go through that same process of acceptable and unacceptable, even with your tech. Because the spoiler is nothing's going to be right 100% of the time. Okay.
Right.
Nobody is, no matter how good of a decision process you give somebody, they're never going to do things exactly the way you do 100% of the time.
Right.
Okay? And so you have to have those margins of expectations, and you have to be ready to be uncomfortable. But with that discomfort, the payoff is, first of all, that you're going to feel comfortable after the first couple times, right? It's going to get better. Sure. I promise you it does get better. But second of all is you get your life back. And you get to focus then on your business, on the aspects of your business that you love, that you enjoyed, and that caused you to start it. And you get to delegate the things that you don't enjoy and that you don't love. And to me, that's the way.
Yeah. Do you think, I know in my experience I have, but have you found as leaders, founders especially, delegate, they're dropping hats, which is good. That's all a sign of growth, right? You're getting big enough where you can't handle the marketing or the finance, and quite frankly, we shouldn't, most likely. Founders aren't known to be CPA oriented, or but as they drop these hats, my experience, as many others I've talked to, they start feeling, it's almost a feeling of irrelevance, right? They start not so much. In my case, I didn't feel like I was losing control. In nonprofits, you're not the owner of the organization, anyways. But you start feeling like I call them relevance wounds. I'm not relevant anymore. And as I've talked to other leaders, that can be confusing because you're excited about the growth of your organization. And it's been centered around you from the beginning, right? That you're the one that started it. You're the one that answered all the questions and did all the work. So it's only thrived because of you. And now that it's thriving beyond you, how do you help founders when they start feeling either irrelevant in some aspects, or oftentimes a relevance wound is when they have less need, or they feel like they're less needed, that they feel less valued?
Right. So there's actually a couple things. The first thing that I would say to somebody in that situation, and that I usually address when somebody starts feeling like they don't have a purpose in their company anymore. And relevance wounds is a great phrase. I love that, by the way. That's fantastic. Wish I had thought of it myself years ago. But when somebody starts feeling irrelevant or out of place in their own company, again, going back to that core foundation, why did you do it anyway? Then we redirect their time into the things they like. So, for example, if you absolutely love sales in your industry, well, just because you're the owner or the founder or the leader or the CEO, whatever title you're giving yourself, doesn't mean you can't be involved in sales. If that's what energizes you, double down on it. Go do it now that you've gotten the other stuff off your plate. Yeah. If you're naturally an operational person, well, then get involved. Do you know how energizing it is to your staff to see you getting energized about the things they do? It's phenomenal. And it's a win-win again, right? So that's all a big part of it. The second part is that, especially as you grow to a point where you have multiple layers of the corporate hierarchy, okay? So when you start getting to a point where your company grows to a point that you've got not just yourself and any other senior leaders that you've got in your circle, but then you have, your upper level managers, mid-level managers, team leaders, and all these things in different hierarchies. Keep in mind that just because you're not interacting with everybody at every level doesn't mean you're not relevant. You're still setting that direction. You're still mentoring the people that are in that one or two layers below you to get up to the next level, right? And, one thing that I learned early on in my career, and I wish I knew who originally said this to credit them, but I've heard it from a couple different leaders, is that I was always told, you can't be promoted, you can't advance until you've trained somebody to do it for you, to take your job. And that was always my mentality. So everybody on my team, I wanted to grow because I always had this idea that, okay, if I'm the team leader, I can't become the manager until somebody else on the team is ready to step into my shoes.
Yeah.
And you're still doing that, even as a founder and as a leader. Because whether it's somebody who's going to step in and fill in for you when you're on vacation, or somebody that's going to buy your company when you're ready to sell it, or whatever the exit plan is, you're growing people. And that is going to help you feel relevant in a different way.
Yeah, we're now touching on legacy, right? Building legacy. And a lot of, listen, when I started my organization, I didn't think about an end. I didn't think about an exit strategy. Even as it grew and got to the point where I was no longer the executive director because I was doing other things, and I didn't have that. I didn't need that, wear all those hats anymore. But I never really thought about legacy. And I think when a leader doesn't have that on mind, or like you said, is not working towards building that legacy, that can be a very lost feeling, as well as almost detrimental, especially to a for-profit company. The founder, you still have a culture that's surrounded what you built. And I think that's why founders have such a hard time sometimes, because the culture they built was part of their identity, and as this organization has built, it's grown its identity from you as well. So as that either changes, you feel threatened, or if you haven't prepared the next generation to maintain that culture because of you haven't done your legacy planning, that can be difficult. And I can imagine, obviously, mailroom, C-level entry or C-level positions to founder and growing your own business. How has the definition of leadership, number one, has it changed from what you used to think to back then to what it is now, and why?
Oh, absolutely. When you're at the lowest level of a corporate hierarchy, leadership is almost a dirty word sometimes. You know what I mean? It feels like,
Big brother almost.
The values pasted on the wall that nobody follows, kind of thing. And then leadership feels the same way. And as you grow through that, you realize a lot of that is because of that perception gap, right? But I think leadership itself, not just my perception of it, but I think leadership itself has to be a constantly evolving thing. We don't do business, financial services doesn't even do business the same way today that it did 10 years ago, let alone 25 years ago. So trying to lead the same way that would have been effective 25 years ago, you're setting yourself up for disaster, right? I like to use extreme examples sometimes, but you think about, what the picture perfect American dream was in like late 40s, early 50s after World War II. And, we all get an image when I say that, right?
Right.
Try leading a company with that right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
With your young Gen X's, your millennials, your Gen Zs, and so on and so forth. You're probably going to run into some emotional intelligence / staffing issues if you try to lead the same way. So leadership is always evolving, and not necessarily over decades. I say that as an example because I know we can all, get that picture, but leadership has to evolve with what's happening not only in the industry, but what's happening socially and in the world.
Right.
So I think it is itself a living, breathing, growing concept. So does it change? Yes. And how has it changed? Just from seeing it from all different angles and realizing that there is no one true definition of it.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I wanted you on, because look, this is the leadership evolution podcast, right? And I've always felt that's important because, listen, I started this because I needed to learn, right? And I'm one of those leaders that, hey, I started an organization. I need to know everything about it. The great ideas have to come from me. If they don't, I'm weak. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not going to have people follow me because they're not going to follow someone that doesn't always do. I mean, all these things, right? And as I step back, right, and be able to calm down, if you will, and look at this and say, realizing you're right. Not only has business evolved from, the World War II times to now, but we all evolve as a leadership and as leaders, period. And an organization evolves, right? Where you started in the mailroom or where you started as a founder, startup company, first opened the doors. That's going to be a different process and it's going to look differently than it does, 10 years later or $10 million later. My dad always taught me the phrase, a very common one, the people that got you your first million is not going to be the same people necessarily that's going to get your next 10. And I think the reason why, I'd like your thoughts on this, Joe. I think that's because they don't understand or maybe don't accept the fact that you have to evolve. The organization is going to evolve, but you as a leader, you have to evolve with it. And if you don't get the coaching, if you can't do it yourself, which most of us can't, I think we need someone, Yeah. If you don't get coaching to be able to understand what that evolution process looks for you, then you're not going to be a part of that. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's very true. And what you were just saying, the feelings that you shared about, I need to be in control. I need to be this one with the answers. That's very common. And I like to challenge that because the one thing that I feel very grateful for in my own career was that I did get that a little bit, and I realized very quickly that wasn't realistic. I was very fortunate to come across that quickly.
Quicker than I did, by the way.
Yeah, well, I got lucky. Let's put it that way. But I have a different perspective on that. I very quickly realized I was never going to have all the answers, and I was going to be disappointed if I expected that of myself. I always said, as a leader, I want to build the team that has the answers I don't have. And so I intentionally sought out people in the hiring process and everything else, and the promotional process, to say, who's smarter than me on something I don't have the expertise in? I wanted the people around me. And for a couple reasons. One, as you talked about, the legacy planning, things like that. But also, that's how your company evolves. If you've got all the answers, your company is stuck with the amount of knowledge you have.
Yeah.
If you have got knowledge beyond yourself, you now have got, more knowledge, but more importantly than that, you have more creativity. And some of the best things I've ever seen happen in business is when you get a bunch of smart people together that all think they know it all and get a whiteboard and put the craziest ideas on the whiteboard and then start Xing off the things that can't happen today. And I want to say can't happen today. Not that they're impossible. They can't happen today. And then figuring out how to make the other stuff happen. That's where I've seen every business get their growth.
Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. I wish I would have learned that a long time ago.
I got lucky and I had a good mentor.
I grew up in an organization. I was with an organization for about 20 years. I went from, outside sales guy. Actually worked from working in the back sweeping floors in a way to actually was going to buy the organization, vice president of marketing and sales. But the organizational leadership, as I grew through that, did not have this mentality, right? It was very 1950s mentality. And so later on, it took me a little while to realize that hey, I'm not, and it's okay that I'm not the smartest person in the room. In fact, it's better that I'm not, right? And that took a little while to learn. So I needed you about 20 years ago, Joe. Well, hey, listen
now, Luke. So that's all that matters.
That's right, brother. And this has been fabulous. You've been a great guest. I have one more question for you. It's kind of an obvious one. I like to share, not every time, but I really want to know your input. Listen, we have a lot of founders on this podcast or listening, and people that are either starting organizations, they're either stuck or trying to figure out how to get past either the position they're at, or maybe even founders that are finding themselves lost in what is the next step, right? So if you were sitting across one of these leaders, one of these founders, what's one piece of advice about creating a business that thrives, right? That grows and thrives and scales without depending on them every day? What would that be? What would be that advice?
Well, I mean, first I would start with the reminder, right? That the growth should create freedom, not dependency. So if the business is requiring you to work harder and make every decision and solve those problems, it's not scaling. And there is, as I said, a difference between scaling and inflating your business. Now, that sustainable growth happens when you're creating the clarity and building the teams and the processes and the organizations that can thrive beyond your personal involvement. So how do you do that? Well, for starters, everybody should sit down at least once a quarter and do a personal values assessment. It's a very simple exercise where you just sit there and you remind yourself why you started your business. And then you do the balance of, what am I doing that aligns with that? What am I doing every day that doesn't align with that? And then what's the plan to make that shift, to tip those scales and get everything back in balance? Because at some stages of your organization, you're going to have to do a lot of things you don't want to do. Okay, that's just naturally building a business, as we talked about.
Sure.
But what's your plan to offload that in a reasonable, responsible manner so that you can then shift the scales back? Because at least then you're going to know that it's coming. You're going to have that reward coming. So the short answer is, I always believe in doing that personal values assessment. It's just a few simple questions. And I tell everybody to do it once a quarter. It's like a little internal audit for yourself versus your business.
Wow, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Joe, you've been great. Hey, I'm listening to this podcast. I need to know, Joe, where do I go to find you?
The easiest thing in the world is to go to the website. It's jpcoachingnow.com. And from there, you can find me on all the social media platforms, the video production platforms like YouTube, all that stuff. Easiest way to find me is to just go there first.
Awesome. Guys, you heard it from Joe. You're an amazing guest. You got a tremendous amount of skill and talent and success. Thank you for being on it and sharing that with us. I've learned a lot. I hope I know our audience has, and it's just kudos to you for your success and your willingness to help people, brother. That's great. I live by the motto, if you want true joy in life, you got to learn, number one, stop looking at yourself and see how you can help someone else out. I think service brings a level or a perspective that allows us to see how we can work through our own problems, because they don't go away. You still have to deal with them, but I think a perspective from service allows us to do that. And, you're helping a lot of people. Thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Luke. This has been great fun. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on the Leadership Evolution podcast. If something in today's conversation challenged you, stretched you, or made you think a little differently, that's the point. Growth always starts with awareness. And if you are struggling in your journey, if you feel like you are fading away from what you have built, visit my website, lukemickelson.com, and learn how you can take back your confidence and create lasting legacy. If you found value in this episode, please share it with another leader who may be in the middle of their own evolution. And remember, your role as a leader isn't just to build something successful. It's to build something that lasts. Build what outlives you.